Welcome everybody. I see we've got some folks joining us. This is Desert Water Agency's Smart Irrigation Month webinar, so hopefully you're in the right place. And if you're not, hey, stay anyway, because we'll have some good things to talk about. We're going to give it just a couple minutes for folks to start coming in. And then once we have most of our folks in the room, we'll go over just a couple little housekeeping items. And we're going to go ahead and get our presentation queued up on the screen for you. We've just got a variety of presenters and slides and some interactive portions today too. And thank you to everyone who showed up on time. We very much appreciate that. So while folks are kind of getting in the room, we're going to go ahead and throw up our welcome poll. So you should see a couple questions in front of you if you're attending live on Zoom. And if you are on Facebook Live, you won't see the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and read them aloud for everybody. Our first question is, have you attended a DWA workshop in the past? And we've got some finer details on the answers. Yes, you've been to one in person. Yes, you've been to one online. Yes, you've been to both. Or no, this is your first webinar with DWA. Or workshop rather. And the second question is, what best describes you? Our options are resident with your own yard, HOA resident and or board member, property manager, landscape professional, employee or board member at a water agency. And if none of those apply to you, if you fall into the other category, you can just pick a random one. It's going to force you to put an answer in there. And you can, oh no, there is another. So if you do other, you can go ahead and go to the chat box and type in what category you would put yourself in. And that'll just help us better understand who we've got here in our group. And if you are a landscaper attending this workshop, please leave your company name and contact information, and we can add you to our landscapers list that we maintain on our website. And you can do that in the chat field. And then the last question in our welcome poll, what are you most eager to learn about today? And you can choose multiple, but we're doing a yard checkup. We're going to be learning about smart irrigation controllers, efficient nozzles, and we are going to be learning about Desert Water Agency incentives. And if there's something else you're excited about, again, if you hit that other field, go ahead and type in the chat so that we can try and tailor our presentation to you. See, we've got one landscape designer. Great. Exciting. Make sure you're on our list as well. Okay, so a couple housekeeping items. We just want to make sure that everyone knows that this webinar is being recorded and you are all in listen only mode. I can't see you or your backgrounds or, you know, hear the dog barking in the background or the TV in the other room. So get comfortable. Don't worry about that. If you have any technical issues, try to put them in the chat box, not the Q&A box. We're trying to use the Q&A box for our speakers, questions to our speakers. And then we are going to be on Facebook Live and recording. So if you have to leave at any point and you want to catch the rest of the webinar, it'll be on Facebook Live and it will be on YouTube. So we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that joined late, please fill the welcome poll if you can. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We're so glad to connect. My name is Ashley Metzger. I'm the Outreach and Conservation Manager with Desert Water Agency. I'm so pleased to have an opportunity to get out there and engage with you folks, members of the community, even from the comfort of my home during this crisis. So I'm sure that many of you have really had drastic changes in your lifestyle, and I think it's great that we're still able to, connect and talk about these important issues as life goes on in the new normal. So, all right, let's share those poll results with our viewers here. Okay, so in terms of how many have attended in the past, overwhelming majority, this is their first workshop. That's great, welcome. I'm so glad to hear that. And that's 53% of respondents. And then in terms of what best describes people, again, about half are people, residents that have their own yard, so they don't live in an HOA. We have a good number of landscape professionals as well. Wonderful, and several employees of water agencies or board members. And then the last question, what are you most eager to learn about? It looks like it's a pretty even spread, so that's wonderful. That means that all of our topics should be pretty relevant to people. Very good. We're gonna go ahead and close out of that and then talk about our yard check. Smart Irrigation Month it's always in July, and it's always a great time to check your yard, regardless of if it's July or January. It's actually nicer to be outside in the cooler months, but you're using so much more water in the warm months that it's really important to make sure, as we're in this peak watering season, that we go ahead and we check different issues in our yard. So we've put together this list. It's actually pieces of this we put together in a document that's going to be mailed out to every single Desert Water Agency customer next month. So you're getting kind of a sneak preview. So things to look for in your yard: puddled water or stained pavement. So oftentimes you're not going to be outside when your system is active and watering. Maybe you have it set to super early in the morning and you're not a morning person. You can still tell by looking at the sidewalk if water has been excessively hitting the pavement. And obviously if it's hitting the pavement, that's water wasted that's not being used for the grass. So you can make some adjustments there. Inspecting all of the different faucets outside and the spigots. If we could go back to the previous slide. Inspecting and checking for broken irrigation, clogged heads, misalignment. So when I say misalignment, what I mean is, sometimes I'll go to a property and the sprinkler, instead of spraying 180 degrees toward the grass, is actually spraying the opposite way, totally toward the sidewalk or the curb or what have you. So make sure that everything is lined up and pointed the way it should be. And then checking your system pressure. This is something that not a lot of people out here do, but is so important. Your irrigation system really operates best, depending on the system, anywhere from 30 to about 45 PSI, which is how we measure pressure. But we deliver water at an average of about 80 PSI. So oftentimes you should have a pressure regulator on your system to bring that pressure down. You also want to check your irrigation controller and any sensors that you may have. We've had customers call in with issues and it turns out the controller fell off their roof, or there's a tree limb totally blocking the rain sensor. So when it rains, their system doesn't shut off. Sometimes the controller will die, or if the power goes out and the batteries in the controller are dead, it resets, and that can be really problematic if it goes to default settings that are not great for our region or for the specific time of year. And then inspecting pool equipment and water levels is really important too, because as many of you know, if you own a pool, the autofill feature on the pool is really handy, so you don't have to keep a hose doing that job. But the downside to it is you're not really understanding how much water the pool is using. So it could be using an excessive amount due to a leak, and unless you're checking in on that, you really wouldn't know. And we can go to our next portion of the leak check, which is repair. So if you see anything during the look section that is not the way it should be, the repair section, you know, fixing any leaks, damaged lines, pipes, broken nozzles, missing drip emitters. So if you see when you're driving by a big geyser, you know, there's likely a sprinkler nozzle or a drip emitter that's missing. If you have a system with a lot of mismatching going on, it's not going to be very uniform in the way that it distributes water. So that may lead to brown spots and issues. And again, if your autofill on your pool is stuck in the on position, that can be a problem. Your pool might be generally higher than it should be all the time. So there's a lot of little things that can go wrong. And then again, not everything requires a big fix or digging in the ground. Some things are really just minor, you know, like we talked about with that alignment, just turning that head back where it should be, putting in a pressure regulator, programming your irrigation controller for the appropriate time of year. And we'll go through and show you a watering guide in just a moment here that has the amount of time you should be watering given the time of year. And then look at how many days of the week you're watering and how many times each day you're watering. So let's look at that watering guide. So we are in June. So if you find your eye kind of toward the middle, or July, the middle of the screen right there, it gives you information on water efficient shrubs, water efficient trees, non-desert trees, and grass. This guide can be found if you go to dwa.org/guide. So you don't have to screenshot it right now, though you're certainly welcome to. So we're looking at 13 minutes a day, 7 days a week for spray systems, or about 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week for rotor systems for grass. So definitely close to the peak watering time, which is June. And we were talking about controllers a minute ago and how it's important. As you can see, January, you only need 3 minutes a day. So if you set your controller in July for 13 minutes and then you forget for 4 or 5 months, you're overwatering every month and wasting water. So one way to combat that is with smart irrigation controllers. So Desert Water Agency has an incentive program for smart irrigation controllers, and we'll show you some of the devices that are eligible for that program. But essentially, it's any controller that waters based on weather data. And the devices, you can get up to $150 for the device itself as a single-family homeowner. And then you can get $100 towards professional installation. And for HOAs or large landscaped areas, commercial properties, the rebate is the first $2,500 will pay 100% of the cost. And then up to $10,000, the interim between $2,500 and $10,000 will pay 75% of the cost. And then in addition to that, we will also pay $750 toward installation. So it's very generous. We want to make sure that people have these smart controllers because a lot of our residents do not live here year round. And even those that do may not remember every month to change their settings on their controllers. So let's get those eligible controllers up on the screen so folks can see them. And just keep in mind, these are only the ones that we get a lot of. There are other models out there that you can find online or at Home Depot or Lowe's or Ewing or Smith, all the different distributors out here. And those are typically fine as long as they have some sort of weather sensor and rain shutoff or weather data via Wi-Fi. So Vicki Pettick on our team is our conservation expert, and she's going to give you an oversight or an overview, I'm sorry, of the different types of controllers and some of the considerations that you should think about before purchasing a controller. She's been with Desert Water Agency for 31 years, and she's been working on conservation for about the past 7 years. So Vicki, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. As Ashley stated, I'm going to go over some things that you should consider before picking out or actually purchasing your controller. Ashley kind of touched on what a smart controller is, but just to kind of reiterate what a smart controller is, or a weather-based controller, they have a weather sensor or Wi-Fi connection that allows them to use weather data from the internet or to determine their watering schedules. And one benefit to this, of course, is when it rains, it will shut off your water. So it's not, that's just an example of one of the things that it can help you with, so that you are not wasting water while it's raining. The devices are great for customers who want to kind of fine-tune their irrigation to conserve a little bit more water. It really doesn't matter what size yard you have. These are always a good tool for kind of fine-tuning your irrigation. They can also be a little intimidating. The term smart sometimes will come with the term, if you're tech savvy, you know, and some people feel maybe they aren't. And they can be intimidating. These controllers can be intimidating due to the smart applications that you can use with your smartphone, and sometimes the wiring and the controls. So these are just some of the main things that I kind of wanted to touch on before or while you're shopping for one, when you're picking one out, when you're purchasing. So number one would be the WaterSense certification. Smart controllers or weather-based controllers carry the WaterSense most carry the WaterSense certification, just as your home appliances do with Energy Star certification for energy efficiency. WaterSense certification means the controller incorporates weather data into its watering schedule instead of functioning as just a basic on and off controller. So just as an example, when you are shopping for one, or either in the store or online, it should have this little symbol right here. It shows WaterSense. And it's a little water drop that's blue and green, and it says WaterSense certified. So be looking for that when you are picking one out. Another thing to consider is your system's watering zones. Controllers are sold based on the number of zones that they can handle. And you have to make sure to check the number of zones before you make that purchase, because if you buy a controller that doesn't have enough zones for what you need, it may not water all of your necessary areas. And again, when you're shopping either online or you're in the store, it will indicate on the controller how many zones max it can handle. Some of them are for 4 stations, 4 zones, all the way up to multiple for commercial and larger properties. So again, you'd be looking for something like this that would say 6 stations or 6 zones. That's just an example. Some installation may involve some rewiring or wiring, depending on where it is that you put it, whether you put it possibly in your garage or on the outside of your garage or someplace on the outside of your house. Depending on where that is will depend on what kind of wiring it will need or rewiring. And if you're not an electrical expert, you may have to contact either an electrician or a landscaper to make that installation for you. Not all controllers are weatherproof, and especially being out here in the elements that we have a lot of heat about 5 months out of the year. at least. And we sometimes have wind, and with that wind, we get a lot of dust and dirt. So you want to be able to protect that controller from the elements. Not all controllers do come with a weatherproof housing. That is something that you might have to get in addition to your purchase. So this is just an example of one. This is an Orbit. So it already has kind of the encasement in it, which actually keeps the insides pretty protected. So, but if you do just have a controller that doesn't have any housing like that, you may have to get something in addition to your controller. And probably the last thing I want to touch on, which is probably one of the most important, is considering the types of controls for your controller, this is something that kind of does intimidate people from time to time. Most models can be controlled and operated using the manual controls on the front of the controller, the buttons, the knobs, and also via an app on your smartphone. All of them work with digital assistants like Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri, but some people might be they may want something that's a little bit simple, and some people may be a little bit more technical and they want something a little bit more techy. So just some examples of what it is that I'm talking about. We have the Hunter X Core here, which this is probably, this is a standalone controller, meaning this isn't something that actually is operated via an app on your phone. This is something that just is operated there at the controls. You can see it has the knobs, buttons, and this actually has, this is a smart controller, but it is considered a smart controller because of this weather sensor. So when this is mounted, probably to the roof or maybe even like a patio cover, it's hardwired to this, which actually, so this senses the weather and it sends messages to the controller, in a sense, making it weather-based. So that's a standalone controller, not anything that needs an app, a smart app, or anything that is Wi-Fi accessible. Now, this is an example, the Orbit Beehive. This is actually an example of one that is, it's a standalone controller, it can be, but it's also Wi-Fi accessible. This one does happen to be or have an app that you can download on your smartphone in order to run it as well. And then probably, this is probably an example of one of our most techy or technical that is Wi-Fi accessible and mostly only Wi-Fi accessible. It doesn't have any controls, or it's not a standalone controller. It's something that will need to be controlled by an app on your phone. There's a lot of pros and cons to all of these examples. If you're, you're kind of intimidated by the smartphone on your app, you may want to go with something that is, you go out, you set it. Most of the time you can set it and forget it. Some people like the best of both worlds. They may want to be able to set it, but then also control it from afar. And the Wi-Fi accessibility, being able to control it from afar, it kind of tends to help some of our residents that aren't here all the time. We do have a large amount of people here in the Valley that aren't here year-round. So that's something that they are able to access and control and not have to be here on site. So that about does it for all my little points that I wanted to make about the smart controllers. If you ever have any questions as to what may not be on that list that we showed you prior to my presentation, you can always contact me or Ashley, and we'd be happy to look at what it is that you are looking at to get. I would encourage you to take part in the incentive. It's a great incentive and a great way to save water. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki, for sharing all of those tips and pointers. I'm sure that was really helpful. I know we had some questions in the chat about, what's best. And I think your breakdown really shared that it depends entirely on the circumstances, your property, how tech savvy you happen to be, do you have Wi-Fi year round at your property, all of those things. So, and as Vicki mentioned, we're always happy to talk with you before you make a purchase about, what factors you should look into. We get a lot of these incentives, through even on a daily basis. So we're pretty familiar with the different models out there. And again, you can buy it at any place you'd like, and it is still eligible for our incentive. We also have other smart irrigation incentives like our efficient nozzle program. And I'm going to show you some different nozzles that apply. And basically, the way the program works is you're able to change out your sprinkler nozzles or bubblers for something more efficient. And just very quickly on bubblers, we won't spend a lot of time on those. Typically, those are, you see out there with a screw on top or a twist top. A lot of times they're a green color. They put a lot of water out, and they're adjustable, which you would think that's a great thing. I can tweak it to exactly what I need and change it. But again, some people tend to crank it up in the summer and they forget to dial it back down. Or actually what we see happen a lot is the weather, as it changes, the plastic will expand and it will kind of crank itself open a bit. So those can be pretty problematic. And so we have, if you're going from something like that to something more efficient, we've got an incentive. The incentive for both the bubblers and the nozzles is the same amount. It's $5 per nozzle, up to. So if it costs $3, we'll give you $3. If it costs $6, we'll give you $5. And then you also get $2 per nozzle for professional installation. So in single family homes, you can apply for up to 100 of these, no questions asked. If you have a larger property and you need more than 100, let us know. We've got a little formula. We can do an assessment of your square footage and then let you know if you're eligible to get more than 100. And then large scale properties, HOAs, we will give 1,000. Or again, if it's a very large HOA, we'll crank you into our formula and see if we can offer more nozzles than that. And the efficient nozzles, they really provide a lot of great savings. And in lieu of me talking to you about that, we wanted to bring in an industry expert. So we have with us Mike Madewell of Hunter Industries. He has about 40 years of experience in the industry. And, he's really helpful. While he works for Hunter Irrigation, he's just a wealth of knowledge on the subject generally. And he's pretty great about being brand agnostic and really just giving you the best recommendations possible. So with that, Mike, we'd love to hear from you more about efficient nozzles.
All right. Can you hear me okay? The volume sounds good. Great. Thank you, Ashley. And I just want to let everybody know that I do a lot of work with different water agencies, and Desert Water has a lot of really good programs that are there for the taking. So do figure out how to take advantage of some of these great opportunities that they're offering, be it controllers, be it nozzles. They have a lot of different great programs, but I'll be talking today about some of the rotating nozzles. And so I want to share my screen here and jump right into a presentation. Let me know if you can see that. We're looking good. So we'll be talking about some of the landscape rebate products. And there's two things I'll kind of be covering. We're going to talk briefly about some legislation that's coming up, and then I'll be talking from there about the differences from rotating nozzles to traditional spray nozzles. So in October of this year, 2020 coming up, it's going to be required that all new sprinklers that go in the ground that are sold anywhere in the state are required to retain or contain within them a pressure regulator to regulate the pressure to the manufacturer's spec. So a basic chart here on the left shows example A that is truly at 30 PSI. And the example B on the right shows a sprinkler head at 50 PSI. So there's kind of a visual there that shows the amount of spray and misting that's going on. But you can see there 3 days a week watering for 10 minutes a day on the average station. You can see the amount of water differential that gets used over 1 year's time. And that's going just from 30 to 50 PSI. And oftentimes you'll find you may have more than 60 or 70 PSI on your systems. So you'll be using even more water in those instances. 30 PSI is the typical manufacturer spec for a regular spray nozzle. So when I say spray nozzle, we're talking about the shrub bodies. You can see here's a couple of models. The brown 30 PSI has the markings right on top. The gray 40 PSI has the markings right there on top. Here's a black Rainbird 1804 model. SAM PRS stands for pressure regulator. So all of these pop-up sprinklers are going to be required to be identified from the top, showing that yes, they do have a pressure regulator built inside of them. So a quick example of what a pressure regulator looks like inside, there's a clear sprinkler. And you can see that secondary little small spring inside there. So as the water comes in through the bottom, it has to pass through that little spring loaded regulator. And that's what reduces the pressure down from, I don't know, 60 or 70, who knows how high your pressure is, down to either 30 or 40 PSI based on what model you've chosen. And these are going to save boatloads of water across the state. So it's so important that we move to this style of pop-up sprinkler industry-wide. And this includes the landscape professional supply houses that all the contractors use, the big box stores. You know, back in the day, you used to be able to buy a big flush toilet. And now when you go to a big box store to buy a toilet, you have nothing but low flush gallonage toilets available to you. So the same concept applies here with these pressure regulated pop-ups. The last piece that goes in with them is they have something called the drain check valve, and you can see that little black rubber gasket in the bottom. And basically when the valve turns off, that's going to keep all that water inside the line. So as opposed to having your line evacuate out the low head after the valve shuts off, it'll keep all that water inside the lateral line, and you won't have to refill that lateral line each time, thus also wasting water. So along with the pressure regulated pop-ups, they'll be containing the little drain check valves, which is a little black washer there on the bottom. So now let's go on to the rotating multi-stream nozzles. And so it's kind of a whole new family of nozzles, and we've had the regular traditional spray sprinkler nozzles around forever. And these rotating nozzles have actually been in the agricultural side of irrigation for many years, but they've just been brought into the landscape side of irrigation, residential landscape and commercial landscape, for about the past 12 to 15 years, 12 years or so. And they've really made a big splash because of their overall low precipitation rate. So if you can see the screen there, you can see there's some at 0.8 inches per hour, 0.4 inch per hour, 0.6, up to 1 inch per hour. So all the brands are represented there. There's the Toro Precision there on the right-hand side. Rainbird R-Van is there in the middle. The Hunter MP Rotator is kind of what started the whole, push towards this style of nozzle back in the day. We have our traditional black MP Rotator, the black bodies, and we have our gray, we call them desert rotators at the 0.8 inches per hour precip rate. Tends to do real nice there in the porous desert soils with the 0.8 inch per hour application rate. So by and large, you're going to be applying water at about half the rate. So if you look at the chart there, a regular rotating nozzle averages about 0.6 gallons per minute compared to a traditional spray nozzle at about 1.6 gallons per minute. So that's more than twice the rate. So think of it like a fire hose and a garden hose. We've been using fire hoses all these years to put water in our grass, and after 6 or 7 minutes, we've got runoff going down the sidewalk. But with the rotating nozzles, by and large, they're more like a little garden hose that you got your thumb over the end and you're applying water slowly and delicately over the area so it has a chance to infiltrate into the soil. That's the big thing, is how fast does the water infiltrate into the soil? So it has a much better chance of soaking in at 0.6 gallons a minute than it does at 1.6 gallons a minute. Of course, larger water droplets on the rotating nozzles means there's less effect from the wind. And they also tend to cover their own footprint much more uniformly than a typical spray nozzle. So that's called distribution uniformity, or DU. And they always have a higher DU. Again, the lower precipitation rate means less runoff. It can result in a little bit longer runtime, but again, you're not blasting the area with a fire hose. You're using a little garden hose, if that makes sense. So here's some photos that kind of show the difference in the patterns on the rotating nozzles. And they're also called multi-trajectory nozzles. And the reason for that is those streams of water, they come out low angle, medium angle, and higher angles. So again, they cover their own footprint much more uniformly than traditional spray nozzles. Here's a couple of more examples of Toro's Precision nozzle and Rainbird's Arvan nozzle. Again, multi-trajectory stream rotor nozzles. So in the bottom right there, this is actually a spray nozzle zone, which is near my house here. And I happened to stop and take some photos one morning as I was heading out. And you can see that this zone is obviously under very high pressure. And you've got real mystification of those water drops. They're being atomized into a fine mist, and the wind is literally carrying them off into other areas. Those larger water droplets on the MP rotators and the Arvan and the Toro Precision, they tend to stay put and go where they're told, if that makes sense, as opposed to being carried off by the wind. Now here's a photo in the bottom left of a traditional spray nozzle. So you can see all that water from that traditional spray nozzle is typically thrown out at the end of his circle. So you heavily rely on the other neighboring sprinkler to hit the feet of this sprinkler, and this sprinkler to go out to the other sprinkler. But if you look at that photo to the right, you'll see there's short range, mid-range, and higher trajectory streams all in the same sprinkler. So you're gonna have a better distribution uniformity over that area. And what that equates to is less runtime and less water over a period of time because you're applying it much more uniformly. So again, in general, they're much more efficient sprinkler, and they apply the water at a little bit slower rate. So it has a chance to infiltrate into the soil, and you don't get any runoff going down the sidewalk after 6 or 7 minutes like you do on typical old-fashioned spray nozzles. So that is the segment on the rotating nozzles.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. I learned a couple really new, interesting things. So it occurred to me while you were speaking about the rotating nozzles that if your system wasn't designed perfectly, which many are not, retrofitting it with the rotating nozzles may increase your system uniformity. So that's a great tip for viewers out there. And before we jump into questions, I just want to remind folks to add your questions to the Q&A or to the chat box. We want to make sure that we're answering the real world questions that we've got out there. As Mike and Vicky were presenting, I tried to get back to everybody in the chat box, but if you have anything lingering that we haven't answered, please go ahead and copy your question again or type it in, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, one more comment about what you just said, Ashley, is that as we talked about, you know, the rotating nozzles, that family of nozzles, they use less water. Each one individually uses less water. So when you're going to design a system from the beginning as well too, you can put more sprinkler heads on one valve than you can on traditional spray nozzles. And oftentimes, you know, when people overtax one existing zone, say they should have only had 7 or 8 spray nozzles on that valve based on the GPM flow rate, and you can do some crazy math and figure all that stuff out. But, you know, if you're not getting spots to head-to-head coverage, people say, well, geez, I got this dry spot, what do I do? Well, if you don't have enough water to begin with, they usually say, I'll just throw a full spray here in the middle and fix that. Well, that's probably the thirstiest sprinkler of that bunch, and you didn't have enough water to begin with. So oftentimes, you can pick one of those 3 or 4 manufacturers, Hunter, Rainbird, Toro, these rotating nozzles, and you can replace those rotating nozzles with the old school spray nozzles, and oftentimes you can get the coverage back that you're looking to get.
Yeah, that's great. We've had a lot of people sing praises regarding the rotating nozzles, and for a while, landscapers had some issues with the nozzles, and the interesting thing was that after hearing complaints for half a dozen years or so, Hunter actually manufactured one that was designed specifically for our region that had a higher flow rate, so you're not going to save quite as much water necessarily, depending on how long you set it. But the reason is because sand was getting stuck in the nozzle heads, and at that higher flow rate, it alleviated much of that problem. So if you had a landscaper that had resistance to these in the past, or had a bad experience with them in the past, the technology on all of them has evolved so much, even within the past couple years. And as Mike spoke about, there's new legislation and things that are really driving this industry forward.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of Q&A, it looks like we have a question about nozzles in a vegetable garden. Obviously, a spray nozzle or a rotating nozzle would not be a suitable fit for a vegetable garden. It really depends on what type of plant you're irrigating, but generally speaking, you're going to want to use a drip emitter, unless you are talking about, a larger plant or a tree, in which case you could use one of those fixed bubblers that we showed you that we have incentives for. I have another question here about a home with a lot of grass. Well, first of all, before you go changing those sprinklers, one thing to consider is our grass removal program. We will pay anyone within our boundary $2 per square foot to remove grass that they have now and put in desert landscaping or artificial turf. But certainly if you want to keep some or all of that grass, reducing your use, you would want to go to rotating nozzles instead of spray nozzles. Mm-hmm. So, if your gardener, and I see from this person that their gardener is not really concerned, your gardener, at the end of the day, their motivation is to keep you happy, or it should be, as a customer. And in the past, that meant keeping the grass green. But now people are becoming more sensitive to water use and their water bills and the conservation ethic here in our desert of preserving water. So part of making your customer happy as a landscaper means making sure that they're comfortable with the efficiency of the property. So making these upgrades, it will cost some money up front. Our incentives generally for nozzles take over all of that cost. So you will have to put a little money out of pocket, but you will be reimbursed. And your landscaper can get a little extra money from perhaps their monthly contract with you to do the installation. So it can be a real win-win. But oftentimes, like I mentioned, landscapers may have tried something in the past or heard about it from another person, or, a lot of times they're also just resistant to change. It's human nature. We all are to some extent. So trying something new can be a little bit intimidating. So I would encourage you to go ahead and talk with your gardener and express the fact that you have a goal of saving water, and you think that these nozzles are definitely an option to do that.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other.
There, could I take that from?
Oh, absolutely, please.
Actually, there's two that have come in. The first of which is from Ann Hayes, and it says, "Can I just replace my old pop-up spray system, which are about 10 feet apart, with rotating heads, or do I need to space out the heads?" And so the gray-bodied MP rotators, the 6 to 12 footers, are designed to fit right into that 10-foot spacing. So you can put just the nozzle onto the existing pop-up, but that leads over to Angela Zapeda's question about what if I have multiple brand bodies? So Toro, their rotating nozzles have very specific threads that you can only use their rotating nozzles on their bodies. If you have Rainbird or Hunter brand pop-ups, those threads are interchangeable. But I would back you up to ask yourself, if you have a mix of brands, the first thing you should say to yourself is, how old are they generally? Are they 2 or 3 years old, or are they 10, 8, 12, 13 years old? If they're older, you might consider going ahead and getting some of the pressure regulated pop-up sprinklers that are already currently available. And that way you could pick a brand and put in all that brand pop-up, and Hunter and Rainbird have matching threads, so you could interchange the nozzles, or I could choose to go Toro, get one of their versions of, but get it all standardized, and that way it'd be much easier for you to replace things down the road. But again, Toro has their own thread pattern, and Rainbird and Hunter have a matching thread pattern.
Great, thank you for taking that, Mike. You hit like 3 questions in one swoop, so that was excellent. If anyone else has any lingering questions, we'd love to get those in. While you're thinking about what questions you may have left over, we're going to go ahead and pop up our wrap-up poll question. So if you are not feverishly typing away an answer or a question in the Q&A or the chat box, please go ahead and take our last poll here. It's just a couple questions, and it should pop up any moment. And again, you're only going to see this poll if you are in Zoom live on the webinar. Those folks tuning in on Facebook Live, you will not be able to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and read the questions. This is actually our first poll, so let's go ahead and take that down and put the final poll up. Okay, so what we are asking you before we wrap up today, did you learn something new today? And for me, yeah, I actually did learn something new today. So I'm really glad we had the expertise from Vicki and Mike. And then question number 2, do you think these webinars are a good tool that DWA should continue offering? We've got a couple different options in there. Definitely, you'll attend in the future, yes. Maybe you'll attend an upcoming webinar. No, the webinar online format doesn't really work for me. Or no, this information is not really helpful to me. Question number 3, how did you hear about this webinar? This is super helpful to us just so that in the future we're able to get the word out in the best way possible. And then can you help us pick next month's webinar topic? So we've been doing 1 webinar a month, essentially since the shelter in place orders went out and we closed our office, and we are happy to have engagement with people because, you know, all of us, you know, a big part of my job is connecting with the community, and it's been really hard to do that over the past several months. And I've found this to be so refreshing to be able to hear from customers and other people in the industry. So we'd love to hear what topic you'd like for us to discuss next month. The options are emergency preparation, what we do as a water agency and what you can do at home, or option number 2, DIY leak check and leak detection technology. So if you can answer those 4 questions and hit submit, we'd really appreciate it. And then again, if you have any lingering questions, we would really love to hear them. And you have our information up on the screen as well. You can always email or call us, and we're going to go ahead and show you the poll results. Did you learn something new today? 62% said yes, a lot. 38% said yes, 1 or 2 things, and no one said nope. So hey, that is a big win for all of us. Thank you, team. I think we hit it out of the park with that. Do you think these webinars are a good tool? It seems like everyone says definitely or yes. How did you hear about the webinar? by and large, it was our email. So that's super helpful. And then for next month, it looks like we'll be doing a DIY leak check and leak detection technology session. That is just great. We're going to go ahead and close out of those results so that you can see all of the ways to contact and connect with us. And we did get one last question in here. Are we planning any other seminars on water saving ideas and incentives? Well, it looks like, yeah, next month we're going to be talking leak detection and a DIY leak check at your home. And we did our very first webinar on all of our incentive programs, and we have recordings of all of the webinars up on our YouTube page and on our Facebook. With Facebook, you'll have to scroll back pretty far to find it, but on YouTube, it should be pretty easy. And we are creating a new section of our website for all things virtual. So you'll be able to go on there and look at all of the different webinars that we've offered. And we also have a ton of great educational resources. I don't know how many of you out there are like me and Vicky that have young kids at home, and it can be a real challenge, but we've got a lot of resources on our website to keep them engaged and learning about water. So dwa.org/learn, lots of tools on there for parents, grandparents, you know, anyone looking to keep the little ones busy, especially in this new digital education environment. All right, well, I want to thank very, very much Mike Madewell from Hunter and Vicky Pettick, our conservation guru, and Sochi Pena, who helped put this whole thing together, and you probably saw an email blast come from her about this webinar. So thanks to the team, and thank you all so much for taking the time to attend. We really appreciate it. If you missed anything, please feel free to watch the recording or shoot us an email. Give us a call. We're always happy to talk to you. We miss seeing folks in person, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. We don't have a date yet, but go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media, and you will be plugged in with the next date time for our webinar, which will be talking about leak checks and leak detection. All righty. Thank you all. Signing off. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.